Josh was a lively kid, but when he got sick and no one was able to find the cause, his life was turned upside down. His parents, Peter and Naja, tried every alternative available to help Josh, but nothing seemed to work. They were ready to let their son spend his last moments in peace with his beloved dog Snickers. But then, something miraculous happened. Poor Josh had been in and out of hospitals for most of his life. He went from perfectly healthy to extremely sick in the blink of an eye, and no doctor could find a reason for it. Josh's condition had been the focus of the family's attention for years, and it consumed everyone's lives, so much so that their only company was the hospital staff and their faithful dog, Snickers. The only thing that would bring them joy was for Josh to get better. They had tried every treatment and medication available, but nothing seemed to work. They even tried alternative treatments, but they didn't make a difference. In short, the family was desperate for a solution, and they were running out of options. Despite the difficulties, the family was determined to find a way to help Josh and return him to good health. Josh's parents, Peter and Naja, had adopted Snickers long before Josh was born. They loved that dog with all their hearts. They had taken him in as a puppy, and they had watched him grow into a loyal companion. Snickers was particularly fond of Josh, so whenever the boy had to spend long stays in the hospital, his dog was miserable. He would just lie in his bed, waiting for Josh to come home. Snickers had been in the family for so long, and they had been through so much together that it was hard to imagine life without him. He was already old, but there was still a lot of life in him, especially when Josh was around. The bond between the two was undeniable, and it was obvious to anyone who saw the two together. Now, of course, Josh's parents had done everything they could to keep the dog healthy and happy, but as he grew older, it became increasingly difficult. They had to make sure he got enough exercise and ate the right food. But despite all their efforts, his health was deteriorating with old age. They knew that eventually they would have to say goodbye. However, they hoped it wouldn't be too soon. When Josh was back home from the hospital, they spent as much time together as possible because they knew that it probably wouldn't be long before he returned to the hospital. Josh took Snickers for long walks, playing fetch and tug of war. Snickers was so happy, running around and exploring the world with his best friend. Josh also took him to the park, letting him run and play with other dogs. They had a lot of fun together. However, Josh's health was always fragile. His body was tired after years of fighting an unknown disease. So every time he had to go to the hospital, it would take him longer to return home. Additionally, his family sought help from specialists around the country, which meant that they didn't spend much time at home. Sometimes they were able to take Snickers with them, but most of the time, the old dog stayed home while they were away. Josh was always sad to leave him behind and be apart from his beloved dog. He couldn't help but wonder how much time they still had together. He knew Snickers was getting older, and he wanted to make the most of the time they had left together. As you can imagine, the family's finances had taken a dive. The costs of Josh's treatments and living were difficult to keep up with. Peter was doing everything he could to make as much money as possible from anywhere, but it wasn't enough. It was a difficult situation for the family, and they had reached a point where they would have to decide what to do. Pay for Josh's medical expenses and risk losing their home, car, and everything else, or accept defeat and make life for Josh as comfortable as possible. They consulted with experts, and they all said the same thing. The family had done everything they could. As a result, the family was lost. They didn't know what to do, and they felt hopeless. Eventually, they decided that giving Josh the best possible quality of life in his final days was the best option. So they went home. They hadn't told Josh because he was too young to understand, and they didn't want his last days to be filled with worry or fear. Instead, they focused on making him happy with Snickers' help. Josh was happy to be home, and he had the energy to play with Snickers. However, the boy's symptoms started getting worse and worse, and Snickers wasn't doing so well either. The dog's energy quickly started to taper off, and he started showing symptoms of tiredness. The change was so drastic that Josh's father decided to take Snickers to the vet for a checkup. The vet examined Snickers, and he determined that the dog should stay for up to 3 weeks for treatment. Now, of course, Peter immediately thought of Josh and how he would take the news. He promised the vet that he would bring Snickers back tomorrow. He just wanted to give Josh another day with the dog before he was turned over to the vet. When Peter got home and broke the news to Josh, the boy was sad at the thought of not seeing Snickers for so long, but also happy because it meant that the dog would get better. He still wanted to make the most of this day with his dog, so they spent the night playing games and eating good food. It was a lovely night, but also bittersweet. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video to help it reach 7K, and make sure to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any future uploads. The next morning, when Josh and Snickers woke up, they both felt worse than ever. But Peter had to take Josh to the vet, so it was time to say goodbye. As you can imagine, this was very difficult for Josh. He had been with Snickers for years, and it was hard to let go. It was clear the dog didn't want to go either. Josh didn't have much strength, but there was enough to hug his best friend. He knew Snickers would be in good hands and hoped that he would be back home soon, but he couldn't help feeling a sense of loss. As Peter and Naja watched, they couldn't help but cry. They joined in a hug, holding each other and their son. They both knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, and that it would be a difficult one. But then something happened. Josh became slack and he passed out. His fever was high, his skin was pale and clammy, and he had a hard time breathing. However, in the next few days, Josh's illness started to improve. After he hugged Snickers, something changed. He was still weak and tired, but his fever was under control, and he could breathe easier. But how was this possible? Was it a miracle or a stroke of luck? His parents were determined to find out what had caused this sudden change in their son's condition, so they started to analyze everything: his diet, lifestyle changes, current medication, etc. Naja was convinced that it had something to do with Josh and Snickers' hug and the deep love that they had for each other. She thought it was a miracle. But Peter had other ideas. He called the doctor to detail everything that happened. He needed an explanation. After hearing Peter out, things started to make sense for the doctor. He was shocked that they hadn't thought of it before, but the pieces were coming together. But first, he had to confirm his theory. So he contacted some experts to get more background information and second opinions. Eventually, the doctor was convinced he was right, so he asked for Josh to be brought into the hospital for tests. Meanwhile, Josh missed his dog so much, and he was hoping that the tests wouldn't take long. He wanted to be back home when Snickers got back from the vet. In the end, the doctors were finally able to determine what was wrong with Josh. It turns out that he had a severe reaction to Snickers' anti-flea spray. They had changed brands right before Josh became ill, but it was such a mundane thing that no one established a connection between the spray and Josh's sickness. Now that they finally knew what was wrong, they could start the right treatment. Eventually, Josh was able to go home, and his health was getting better and better every day. Then it was time for Snickers to come back home as well. He was fully recovered and back to his old self. When Josh and Snickers reunited, it was one of the happiest moments of the family's life. Not only were things looking up, they were all back together again and ready to put this chapter of their lives behind them. What do you think of today's story? It's crazy how something so small, like using a different brand, can lead to something bigger. Don't forget to give this video a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll see you in the next video.